Chapter 7 of Childhood by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Charles James Hogarth, 1869 to 1945. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 7. The Hunt. At the head of the cavalcade rode Turka, on a hog-backed roan. On his head he wore a shaggy cap, while with a magnificent horn slung across his shoulders and a knife at his belt, he looked so cruel and inexorable that one would have thought he was going to engage in bloody strife with his fellow men rather than to hunt a small animal. Around the hind legs of his horse the hounds gamboled like a cluster of checkered, restless balls. If one of them wished to stop, it was only with the greatest difficulty that it could do so, since not only had its leash fellow also to be induced to halt, but at once one of the huntsmen would wheel round, crack his whip, and shout to the delinquent, "Back to the pack there!" Arrived at a gate, Papa told us and the huntsman to continue our way along the road, and then rode off across a cornfield. The harvest was at its height. On the further side of a large, shining, yellow stretch of cornland lay a high purple belt of forest, which always figured in my eyes as a distant, mysterious region behind which either the world ended or an uninhabited waste began. This expanse of cornland was dotted with swaths and reapers, while along the lanes where the sickle had passed could be seen the backs of women as they stooped among the tall, thick grain, or lifted armfuls of corn and rested them against the shocks. In one corner a woman was bending over a cradle, and the whole stubble was studded with sheaves and cornflowers. In another direction shirt-sleeved men were standing on wagons, shaking the soil from the stalks of sheaves, and stacking them for carrying. As soon as the foreman, dressed in a blouse and high boots, and carrying a tally stick, caught sight of Papa, he hastened to take off his lamb's wool cap, and wiping his red head, told the women to get up. Papa's chestnut horse went trotting along with a prancing gait, as it tossed its head and swished its tail to and fro to drive away the gadflies and countless other insects which tormented its flanks, while his two greyhounds, their tails curved like sickles, went springing gracefully over the stubble. Milka was always first, but every now and then she would halt with a shake of her head to await the whipper in. The chatter of the peasants, the rumbling of horses and wagons, the joyous cries of quails, the hum of insects as they hung suspended in the motionless air, the smell of the soil and grain and steam from our horses, the thousand different lights and shadows which the burning sun cast upon the yellowish-white cornland, the purple forest in the distance, the white gossamer threads which were floating in the air or resting on the soil, all these things I observed and heard and felt to the core. Arrived at the Kalinovo wood, we found the carriage awaiting us there, with beside it a one-horse waggonette driven by the butler. A waggonette in which were a tea urn, some apparatus for making ices, and many other attractive boxes and bundles all packed in straw. There was no mistaking these signs, for they meant that we were going to have tea, fruit, and ices in the open air. This afforded us intense delight, since to drink tea in a wood and on the grass, and where none else had ever drunk tea before, seemed to us a treat beyond expressing. When Turka arrived at the little clearing where the carriage was halted, he took Papa's detailed instructions as to how we were to divide ourselves, and where each of us was to go. Though, as a matter of fact, he never acted according to such instructions, but always followed his own devices. Then he unleashed the hounds, fastened the leashes to his saddle, whistled to the pack, and disappeared among the young birch trees, the liberated hounds jumping about him in high delight, wagging their tails and sniffing and gambolling with one another as they dispersed themselves in different directions. "Has anyone a pocket handkerchief to spare?" asked Papa. I took mine from my pocket and offered it to him. "Very well, fasten it to this greyhound here." "Gizana?" I asked, with the air of a connoisseur. "Yes, then run him along the road with you. When you come to a little clearing in the wood, stop and look about you, and don't come back to me without a hare." Accordingly, I tied my handkerchief round Gizana's soft neck, and set off running at full speed towards the appointed spot, Papa laughing as he shouted after me, hurry up, or you'll be late." Every now and then Gizana kept stopping, pricking up his ears and listening to the hallooing of the beaters. Whenever he did this, I was not strong enough to move him, and could do no more than shout, "Come on, come on!" Presently he set off so fast that I could not restrain him, and I encountered more than one fall before we reached our destination. Selecting there a level, shady spot, near the root of a great oak tree, I lay down on the turf, made Gizana crouch beside me, and waited. As usual, my imagination far outstripped reality. I fancied that I was pursuing at least my third hare, when, as a matter of fact, the first hound was only just giving tongue. Presently, however, Turka's voice began to sound through the wood in louder and more excited tones. The baying of a hound came nearer and nearer, and then another, and then a third, and then a fourth deep throat joined in the rising and falling cadences of a chorus, until the whole had united their voices in one continuous, tumultuous burst of melody. As the Russian proverb expresses it, the forest had found a tongue, and the hounds were burning as with fire. My excitement was so great that I nearly swooned where I stood. My lips parted themselves as though smiling, the perspiration poured from me in streams, and in spite of the tickling sensation caused by the drops as they trickled over my chin, I never thought of wiping them away. I felt that a crisis was approaching, yet the tension was too unnatural to last. Soon the hounds came tearing along the edge of the wood, and then, behold, they were racing away from me again, and of hares there was not a sign to be seen. I looked in every direction, and Gizana did the same, pulling at his leash at first and whining. Then he lay down again by my side, rested his muzzle on my knees, and resigned himself to disappointment. Among the naked roots of the oak tree under which I was sitting, I could see countless ants swarming over the parched grey earth and winding among the acorns, withered oak leaves, dry twigs, russet moss, and slender, scanty blades of grass. In serried files they kept pressing forward on the level track they had made for themselves, some carrying burdens, some not. I took a piece of twig and barred their way. Instantly it was curious to see how they made light of the obstacle. Some got past it by creeping underneath, and some by climbing over it. A few, however, there were, especially those weighted with loads, who were nonplussed what to do. They either halted and searched for a way round, or returned whence they had come, or climbed the adjacent herbage with the evident intention of reaching my hand and going up the sleeve of my jacket. From this interesting spectacle my attention was distracted by the yellow wings of a butterfly which was fluttering alluringly before me. Yet I had scarcely noticed it before it flew away to a little distance and, circling over some half-faded blossoms of white clover, settled on one of them. Whether it was the sun's warmth that delighted it, or whether it was busy sucking nectar from the flower, at all events it seemed thoroughly comfortable. It scarcely moved its wings at all, and pressed itself down into the clover until I could hardly see its body. I sat with my chin on my hands and watched it with intense interest. Suddenly Gizana sprang up and gave me such a violent jerk that I nearly rolled over. I looked round. At the edge of the wood a hare had just come into view, with one ear bent down and the other sharply pricked. The blood rushed to my head, and I forgot everything else as I shouted, slipped the dog, and ran towards the spot. Yet all was in vain. The hare stopped, made a rush, and was lost to view. How confused I felt when at that moment Turka stepped from the undergrowth. He had been following the hounds as they ran along the edges of the wood. He had seen my mistake, which had consisted in my not biding my time, and now threw me a contemptuous look as he said, "Ah, master!" And you should have heard the tone in which he said it. It would have been a relief to me if he had then and there suspended me to his saddle instead of the hare. For a while I could only stand miserably where I was without attempting to recall the dog, and ejaculate as I slapped my knees, "Good heavens, what a fool I was!" I could hear the hounds retreating into the distance, and baying along the further side of the wood as they pursued the hare, while Turka rallied them with blasts on his gorgeous horn, yet I did not stir. End of chapter 7. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.